I'd like to talk about one of the complex problems that we face, and that is the idea of feeding the hungry and how we go about that in our country and what are some of the problems that we encounter. One of the main ways that we feed people in our country is through the Farm Bill that is passed. Every 5 years, comes up for discussion and changes. It funds the SNAP benefits and also subsidy payments for commodity crop farmers, funds for crop insurance, and also conservation efforts. So the Farm Bill is an amazing bill for us in our country. It covers so much, very extensive, and also, of course, because it is so extensive, very controversial. The Farm Bill that is coming up this year, the price tag is pegged for about over $1 trillion for the first time. So you can see how enormous it is, how much it covers, and really one of the crucial pieces of legislation to really feed the hungry in America. Subsidy payments are given to individual farmers who grow what we call commodity crops. That would be corn, soybeans, wheat, and cotton. They're paid by the government when the commodity price drops below a certain threshold. Now, this is important because it encourages farmers to keep planting even when they can't make a profit. And of course, why would you plant if you can't make a profit? But if you get this subsidy, that would be good because then you could continue to plant and continue to supply for the country. SNAP comprises 80% of the Farm Bill's cost. So you can see how significant it is in terms of that nutritional assistance that is needed for those who otherwise, without it, would go hungry. The program feeds 42 million people. So when you talk about feeding the hungry in the United States, this is one of the key components. Of course, we have our local food pantries and all of those individual efforts, but really the SNAP program and the Farm Bill, they are much more extensive and much more needed, obviously, for the people. All of those efforts, of course, that we do on an individual basis are extremely important and help tremendously. But when you're feeding 42 million people, just think about it. How many of us, with all of our combined efforts, could feed 42 million people? It is 12% of our country. And 25% of America's children. So you can see the importance for feeding children in this program. Also feeds low-income people, feeds the elderly and the disabled who depend on it. So an extremely important program. The Department of Agriculture calculates the average cost of a nutritious meal for a family of 4. And they base the SNAP benefits on that average cost. Until 2021, this calculation had only adjusted for inflation, the grocery prices from 1975, when the calculation was first made. So 1975, you can see how it would have been outdated, and it wasn't really brought up to current standards. Before 2021, when the adjustment was made, the calculation did not cover the cost of a modestly priced meal in 96% of the U.S. counties. So you can see how inadequate it was. 96% of the U.S. counties, that's not too good. That's from a study done by the Urban Institute. The increase that was put into calculation was very modest, between $12 and $16 per person per month. We're not talking about a great deal of money here when you think about it. Now, who wins out of this procedure with regard to the Farm Bill? Huge companies that control the American food system, that delivers huge profits to industry by subsidizing cheap commodity grains that sell below the cost of production to agribusinesses, fast food chains, and global exports. This has been studied quite extensively by Luke Goldstein, and this is something, of course, when you think about this type of program, this farm bill, you would never really imagine that it is these large companies, the agribusinesses, that are making huge profits. Here you're trying to feed the hungry, and you're battling this particular arrangement in the farm bill that leads to really negative consequences for the people, because the food that is produced is not, high quality food. Some of the crops also feeds animals, mostly at CAFOs, the concentrated animal feeding operations. These are owned by a small number of extremely powerful companies. So again, to feed the animals that we use for food production. And many have criticized these feeding operations as not being really good and healthy for the animals that are involved. So many are involved in the movement to push back against that. Some of this money also goes to oil companies, which use it in the production of corn ethanol. So that's another big component in terms of the Farm Bill. Much of it, unfortunately, ends up in inexpensive, unhealthy food produced by dominant food companies and fast food restaurants. So the food that is being produced is not healthy, good, nutritious food. Only commodity farmers have access to the subsidies rather than fruit or vegetable farmers. So you're leaving out a really big component of our diet, right? The fruit and the vegetables. Farmers refer to this new food system as a new form of serfdom. It devastates farmers and incentivizes a food system that causes rising obesity rates, limited access to fresh foods in inner city areas, nearly 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions globally. So you look at this system and say something is out of whack here, where we're not really feeding people that well. We're producing all these greenhouse gases, and people in the inner city who probably are most in need of the food are not getting the fresh foods they need. Initially, large agricultural companies were opposed to these subsidies. They said, no, we don't have subsidies, you don't want to do that. Now, lawmakers began to prioritize large single crop farms over small diversified family farms. Earl Butz, who is the head of the Department of Agriculture, said farmers have to go big or get out. Well, over 2 million farmers left the industry between 1950 and 1990. So they did get out, unfortunately. Food aid was added to the Farm Bill in 1964. Southern cotton farmers needed broader support for the cotton subsidies. So the food aid, the SNAP program that is put into the Farm Bill, really helps this bill to pass. Probably would not pass without the addition of the food aid. Support for SNAP has helped to sneak destructive policies into the bill that have facilitated the transfer of wealth and land from farmers to corporations in the agricultural, food, oil, and chemical industries. This is from Rebecca Wolf of the Food and Water Watch. So what has happened has been a huge transfer of wealth and land, and these individual farmers are kind of left out, and the corporations have taken over. Farmers have experienced rising rates of debt, bankruptcy, and suicide. Rural economies that depend on agriculture have been endangered. So these are some of the fruits of the Farm Bill and the way the arrangement has gone. What about the food system? The food system creates less nutritious food, fails to remunerate the people who grow and harvest it, and it pollutes our air and water. So we're trying to feed the hungry, but we have all these negative consequences from the approach that we have taken in the Farm Bill. And this has evolved over years, obviously, and this is the law of unintended consequences. The main thrust was to help farmers and really the smaller farmers initially, and then also added in 1964 to help people that were struggling who didn't have good food to eat and needed extra support to feed their families. So what we're looking at is the concept of refashioning our food system as we analyze this Farm Bill. And how would we do that? What are some of the principles that would be involved in making a better food system? A food system that's going to be more nutritious and more beneficial to the individual farmer and not so much the large corporate agricultural agribusiness. Well, one step would be to advocate for an open market for independent farmers. Another would be a rule that would require meat packers to purchase half of their animals on the open market. Putting a limit on subsidy payments to huge, mostly corporate-owned farms, saying, well, if you have this huge farm, you don't need as much of a subsidy because of the large amount of profit that you're making. I mean, this is not the purpose of the Farm Bill. Redirecting government assistance now to the smaller farmers. The farmers who are the most in need are the smaller farmers. So getting a formula that would benefit them more than the large corporate farmers who are making in agribusiness such huge profits. And prevent tax money from being used by agricultural lobbyists for advertising. Not a good thing. The purpose was to feed people, not advertising. Other bills are called marker bills, and they're smaller pieces of legislation attached to the larger Farm Bill. And what you want to look at there is increased land access for young farmers so they can start in their farms. Help small diversified farms access crop insurance so that they can be provided for with adequate insurance. And funding research into environmentally friendly farming practices. One of the things that you really want to concentrate on is, how can you farm in such a way that it is healthy for the soil? So many times the way farming is done, the soil becomes depleted. And there are healthy ways to do that, and we should be advocating for that, and that should be in the Farm Bill. So you have really a little dilemma here in terms of feeding the hungry. You have the influence of powerful interest groups that have been benefiting greatly from the Farm Bill and making huge profits. And then the declining belief that corporate agriculture can keep Americans fed and healthy. The belief now is very different. We're not into the fact that these corporate farms are doing us good stuff. I mean, if the food isn't healthy, if it's not really going to those that are most in need, and if the smaller farmer is kind of out of the situation, you're not really developing a good program that will truly feed the hungry and help those farmers most needed. So as we take a look at the Farm Bill going forward, these would be some considerations to look at and ask, and it is a crucial piece of legislation. We look at it from a faith point of view, and certainly we say that one of the principal works of mercy is to feed the hungry. We all want to do that in an individual way, and many do by supporting their local food pantries. And that is certainly significant and important. But when you're talking about a large piece of legislation that feeds 42 million Americans, you realize the need for something that is good and something that truly helps the people, gives the people a healthy diet, and also at the same time helps those smaller farmers that are struggling.